Hello and welcome to Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror movies and awesomeness. This week we continue our glorious Satanic Panic Summer Series with the 1982 TV film Mazes and Monsters, directed by Steven Hillard Stern. This is episode 306. So, bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have seen it. So, warning, spoilers ahead. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, writer of the currently out book, The Bookman. With me from Austin is Tony Salvaggio, tech director at Rooster Teeth, lead singer and bassist of the band Deserts of Mars, and lead guitarist of the band Rise from Fire. Say hello, Tony.
Howdy.
Howdy. Also in Denver, with me in another room, we have incoming Colorado State University freshman and D&D enthusiast, Sophia Henderson. Say hello.
Hi.
Hi. And finally, also in Denver, as always, color commentary from attorney Julia Guzman of Guzman Immigration of Denver. Say hello, Julia.
Hello, and happy Father's Day to Jason and also Tony, who's a kitty cat daddy.
Yeah. They didn't give me anything today, although they got me lots of love. So. But I think that's because, so I will pet them. But they pay me back, so it's fine. But they're great.
That is very sweet. And thank you very much, Julia. Okay, so Mazes and Monsters, also known as Rona Jaffe's Mazes and Monsters, is a 1982 American made-for-TV drama film directed, as I mentioned, by Steven Hillard Stern. It's about a group of lovable college kids and their interest in a totally made-up RPG game called Mazes and Monsters, which is intended, obviously, because of its alliteration, to be D&D. The film stars 26-year-old Tom Hanks. This is his first leading film role. So, and I remember I saw this movie. So let's get our opening thoughts. Let's go Julia, Tony, and then Sophia, and then I will take us into topics. So keeping it to about 2 minutes, Julia, what are your opening thoughts about Mazes and Monsters?
Oh boy, it's something. So Jason for Father's Day got himself a big ass TV, and it's very high def. And our first thing that we watched on this TV was the 1982 TV movie Mazes and Monsters.
Oh, now the TV's just cursed. Like, that's it.
Saying that, we really appreciated the high quality, high definition when we got the full graininess of.
It's true. It's a 4K Ultra TV, and yes, we watched an SD image of a 1982 television.
Way to break it in, because this transfer is totally off of VHS.
There you go. So, but anyway, no, it's a fun movie. There's some kind of, some dark things, some sad things, but mostly it's fun. I think that there's a lot of trigger warnings in this film for various things. And for me, I guess not any serious ones, but for sure that watching them run around the World Trade Center towers was really sad. But there's a lot of there's some things. But anyway, Tom Hanks is adorable. I don't know if is this during Bosom Buddies time or before
That's
that?
A good question. Yeah, I don't know.
I'll have to look that up while we're going through everybody's intros. Anyway, I'm excited that that my eldest child is on with us. Thank you, Sophia, for joining us.
Yes.
You're welcome.
And the answer is yes. He made this while he was making Bosom Buddies.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yes. And in that, he played somebody who was 10 years out of college. So, for what it's worth. Tony, I know that we've talked about this before, and if we haven't, it would shock me. But what are your opening thoughts on Mazes and Monsters?
So, apologies if I rehash some things that I've talked about before about Satanic Panic.
Pretend that nobody's listened to the show before.
But I may bring up some stuff, but part of it, of course I miss Drew, but I think this is going to be fascinating because having Sophia on to talk about a generation where this isn't stigmatized, and in fact, Dungeons and Dragons is just the thing you do, is awesome and fascinating. I'm really, really looking forward to this kind of multi-generational episode. I think that's really awesome. Mm-hmm. This is not a good movie, in my opinion. It sucked at the time because, of course, my friends and I who wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons, I was saying earlier, this is a movie for pearl clutching grandmas and parents.
Yeah.
This is not anybody who ever played Dungeons and Dragons ever knows that all of this is ridiculous and stupid. And, this was made, the book was written in a matter of days to capitalize on all of this media crap. It falls into the line of Jack Chick tracks. What's fascinating is the movie, a lot of Satanic Panic stuff falls on the fact that, Dungeons and Dragons is a gateway drug to the occult. This doesn't do that, but in fact, what really makes it sad is that it's actually a movie about mental health and mental illness and some of how it's treated. And it's done in a really exploitative way, blaming Dungeons and Dragons on some of this, or maybe the lack of people realizing that the mazes and monsters in this thing isn't what's really the problem here. And it does it in such a ham-fisted, terrible way that it's, oh, good night. It fails on so many ways, and it's so frustrating. It is really interesting as a thing of its time. Because what I hope is that people who play Dungeons and Dragons today and didn't grow up with any of the stigmatism look at this and go, what? Wait, people believe this? And the fact is that there's a huge segment of the population that actually did believe this. And it was fueled by a bunch of erroneous cases. In fact, what's really sad is the real life person it's based on, who was 16, did actually kill himself. Like, the suicidal parts that they touch on, he eventually did, not because of Dungeons and Dragons, but was all in this. And in reality, he wandered around, they found him. He was in the sewer system caves or whatever. There were he was in some tunnel. He was in
steam tunnel.
Yeah. And that's the real takeaway, is the mental health aspect of this. But as far as an eye-rolling, super annoying, this is the movie where your grandparents or your aunts would, I saw that movie on TV. You play that game. Is it really that bad? And you'd have to explain to them that I go back to, and I know I'm going a little long, but I go back to anyone during this time period ever. I never saw this happen in the history of any of the media, because it wouldn't have made good media, right? Like, you want that Geraldo BS expose he did, that jerk. But if anyone had just gone to an actual Dungeons and Dragons game and watched somebody roll up characters and eat chips and hang out and, actually just watch somebody play Dungeons and Dragons, where they're rolling dice and going, well, you see a frustrated dungeon master who's concocted all this stuff and has built this huge campaign, and somebody goes, I want to screw the orc girl, or can I just set everything on fire? And the dungeon master goes, oh, sure, roll for initiative.
Yeah. Exactly.
If any expose had happened where they actually just went to anybody playing Dungeons and Dragons, they just would have shut off the cameras. It's just
This is too boring.
This is
nothing.
None of this is a cult. I don't. Why? Oh. Can we just let's go back to San Francisco when we're filming Anton LaVey. At least we'll have something interesting. They would have just shut it all down, because none of that. I know that out there in the world, some people got the wrong impression and probably got into the occult. But the vast majority of Dungeons and Dragons isn't anywhere like that.
Yeah.
But of course, again, that doesn't make great media, which leads us to this also not great media. But very sensationalist, and caused a lot of us who this was part of our time we like to hang out, because we were all nerdy people, caused us to have to go, no, it's not, no, thanks, Mazes and Monsters, written in several days and filmed by a decent cast. Like, again, people got paid, but this movie,
it reminds me. So thank you very much, Tony. I'm sorry, I started talking, and actually, we have to get opening thoughts from Miss Sophia. So Sophie, go for it.
Oh yeah. So okay. So as like Tony was saying, I'm sort of I've been playing D&D recently. I'm only 18, so I started playing D&D when I was maybe in 7th grade. So I've been playing it for a few years, and every time I've had like an experience playing D&D, it's been with a group of friends, and it's been just for fun. We do whatever we want. We dink around. Our campaigns are never really that serious. So it was interesting, like, looking at this movie during the peak of Satanic Panic and all the stuff that happened way before I was born. So I only really hear about it. And it's just like, interesting to look at now because a lot of nerd culture that was super stigmatized back then is like super normal and like mainstream now. Everyone's into Marvel. It's fine playing D&D. There's some pretty popular podcasts and like YouTube channels playing D&D, and it's all good. And so I was like looking back at this where they're playing this game that is supposed to be D&D and is nothing like it. I'm just like, okay,
Yeah.
sure. Let's call this D&D and go with it, I guess. It's like we were talking, like Tony mentioned rolling characters and messing around, and there's all these memes actually now of like, bard characters are always, the ones who are trying to mess around, play random music, flirt with stuff, whatever. And it's all a matter of, it's just a chance to hang out and play a game with friends. And of course, no one got that back then. It's all like, the weird thing about like, this is all fantasy, and for some reason that tied into Satanic Panic, people thought it was all a cult, and it's like nowhere near it, because nothing in these games is anywhere near anything occult in the real world. It's all wizards and sorcerers and elves and orcs, and no one cares about real life occult in D&D. So it's all very strange.
So wait, so you're not actually trying to like summon any demons or anything?
The most recent campaign I've played takes place in a universe where we're fighting a plague, and we don't care about anything.
That sounds really
like
pretty
that.
like reality,
Well,
actually.
You know what? We started this campaign like 5 months ago, so I'm thinking my friend who started this campaign is psychic.
Right.
No, see, that's where we come back to summoning. I think you guys summoned the plague.
Oh no, it's all true.
We found out now. Well, there goes my thesis. Never mind.
Yeah, never mind.
But yeah, I was like the entire time I'm watching from the perspective of, I'm like looking at this and I'm like, okay, well, that's not right. That's weird. Maybe that happened, but maybe years ago. I had like several questions about, well, I think we talked about this in person earlier, the fact that they invent LARPing. And I think we looked into it and LARPing didn't exist yet when the movie actually came out. So it is
and for those of us who are not
innovative.
For those of us who are not nerds, what is LARPing?
Live action role playing. It's
Point
D&D
of order.
in
all
real
of us are
life.
nerds.
Yeah.
For those of the people out there who are not nerds, why are you listening
live
to us
action
if
role
you're not?
playing. It's like, oh, what are you even doing here?
Right.
Live action role playing, people dress up in costumes, bring a, fake sword and a fake bow and arrow, and you'll still like play semi by the rules of D&D, modified so that it works in the real world, but it's like usually with a lot more production quality, and usually they're professional things that you can join these campaigns. And so the idea that they invented their own little version of LARPing while wandering around in these caves is, I guess, creative, but like the idea that like at the end she mentions like, oh, we play without any dice or maps, and I'm like, yep, that's how that works. You're in the real world. There's nothing like that there. Okay.
So when you keep referring to not. I think you said informal or something, and then you said professional. Are there professional D&D players? Is that like a thing that exists in the world?
I said, well, there's there's podcasts. Right. Like, there's a very popular one that I think I mentioned earlier to Tony, that I see clips of videos of like a YouTube podcast playing D&D on my like various social media platforms pretty regularly because it's pretty popular. And I don't know about professional necessarily, but there's plenty of people who like record their sessions and stuff for stuff like that.
Well, when I say professional, I mean, like there's professional poker players. Like there's tournaments where people actually go and play these games. Is there stuff like that for D&D? Do you know? Where there's like actual tournaments where people are paying to get into this, or no?
I mean, there's been at cons, there was usually a room, maybe a tournament in the way that you ran the campaign, I guess. And that's been a thing for a long time. But I mean, the closest right now would be Critical Role is one of the most popular ones, and they're in fact doing an animated series and such, and their YouTube channel grew exponentially.
It's probably easier to have a tournament for prizes and things with a game that is more structured, like like a Counter-Strike tournament or something like that.
But there were tournament rules, Dungeons and Dragons, like they're depending on which especially if you went to like a Gen Con type of thing or more fantasy cons, there were rooms set up that had some of that, but it's not quite the same. The way you would do the campaign would be like an abbreviated campaign, etc. But it's more people just getting. I mean, most of the rooms were just people getting together and playing D&D.
Like,
Julia, one way that good.
Sorry, there's not really a way to win D&D unless someone has it set up that way and you're like trying to hunt a treasure or something.
Right.
It's not like a game you can win, so a tournament wouldn't really be feasible necessarily. When I say professional, I mean like you can sign up, pay money to join a professionally put together like LARPing campaign, maybe. Like there's I heard about there's a zombie game that like a certain like college campus hosts every year that where some kids like will dress up as zombies. You have to fight the zombies with like fake weapons. If you get touched by one, you turn into a zombie. It's a whole thing, and it's you have to sign up for it. I think you have to pay a fee or whatever. It's all organized by these people, and that's kind of what I meant by professional. But like there are people who will do their own LARPing in their backyards just on their own and just having fun. And that's kind of what the guys in the movie are doing.
But most of the LARPing, when it really picked up, I think there's always been some of it because you always had tournaments, and Society for Creative Anachronisms was always doing demonstrations and stuff like that. But Vampire the Masquerade is what really kicked it off.
Absolutely, the Mind's Eye Theater, so called, which premiered like around this time, like around the time this movie came out. Yeah.
Well, I remember when I was in Savannah. Going to school, I had this industrial band. That was the first band I was in, and this one goth club, industrial club, which is that's our audience. There weren't that many industrial bands that we knew of at the time. We went to go pass out flyers, but we didn't know it was Vampire the Masquerade night. So even though I liked Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that, like it was still one of these things where I would go, hey, here's my band, and you'd catch somebody who was in it to win it, and they, well, kind sir, what might you be passing my way? And I just, on the one hand, like I think it's cool, and of course I always love, I like that kind of stuff, but on the other hand, I want to go, can you just take the flyer? Like,
just take the flyer.
Yeah.
Like, again, that's not a knock, but when you're trying to just promote your stuff, and and I know that person, like I've seen them around when they're not a vampire.
Yeah.
And so it's like, yeah, okay, man, I'll try to play along, but I really don't know if I'm into this right now,
Yeah.
But that was always kind of like that was my one big kind of intro to LARPing, was like, oh, I get it. I would do this on another night, but I hope that all you vampires show up to our show next week or whatever, Not many of them did, unfortunately. We were probably pretty terrible.
So yeah, I that's beautiful, by the way. The first time I encountered LARPing was at the Dracula Con in 1997. And I was unaware that existed. It's just, you're right. It's totally amazing. It's like something out of a comedy, is to run into somebody and they'll go, what manner of paper are you handing towards me right now? It's like, Jesus Christ. I'm like, this is a Hilton lobby. But anyway, sir.
This is an Arby's.
But okay, so my first topic that I wanted to ask is this film exploits the fears of Americans about D&D. And by the way, I just want to mention that one thing in my mind I'm comparing it to is this episode of Quincy, which is a television show about this medical examiner who investigates murders, right? And Quincy had an episode, same like quarter, like in March of '82, so just a couple of months after this, so contemporaneous, where in that case, Quincy discovered punk rock and how punk rock made you not value life. And as Batman said in one of his early comics, it's like, life's cheap for their kind, and he just discovered it, and he quotes a bunch of punk rock lyrics, and same thing, pearl clutching aunties, right? That was trying to from a Hollywood perspective, that was trying to exploit fears of music that the people watching 60-year-old Jack Klugman did not listen to. this is trying to exploit people's fears of D&D. But what I wanted to ask about is, first, is that like okay? Like is it okay to make entertainment that exploits fears that we know are not accurate? And number two, does it in fact live up to that hype? In fact, I would say you could look at this movie, and in fact, if you actually watch the movie, the people who kind of play D&D just for the hell of it seem to be pretty hip and happening and healthy and got their stuff together.
Well, my favorite thing is always to compare everything that we talk about to addiction, and in this case, it's super easy because what it is really just that one of the characters, Tom Hanks' character, is as Tony said, mentally ill, but also addicted. So he's got an issue where he has his own mental illness issues that may or may not be related to the loss of his brother. He lost his brother. He blames himself for that. And he has this outlet that he has kind of become addicted to, but it's an escape from reality, the reality that he doesn't want to deal with. So he really gets into it and escapes to it, and eventually he gets lost in that world. And that's just addiction. That's just addiction. I mean, when you become a drug addict or an alcoholic or whatever else is a real addiction. I don't just mean like chocoholic or whatever, which I suppose you could take it that too far, but it's not usually escapism as much as it is just a distraction. But when you're doing drugs or alcohol, presumably you go into a completely different mind space that is nothing like what you would have on a regular day-to-day basis, and that's what he's doing here.
Yeah, so not to contradict you too much, it's like, but I feel like there's a little less to do with addiction in his case, in that he's like psychotically depressed.
Yeah,
like literally he has psychotic depression because he's so upset about his brother going missing, and it all bubbles to the surface that, like, I think they talk about it a little bit. He starts to use like he has.
Oh, you're right. I said his brother died. He didn't die. I said he lost him. He left. Yeah.
Well, he left, and I think we're meant to assume that he killed himself or something like that, because that's like the point of him going to the Twin Towers. Yeah. So like he has a reality break. He just completely like loses grip on what's real and what's not in the game, right. And he has trouble differentiating, because I guess he started using mazes and monsters. He might have initially used it as a way to like cope, but it got too much, and he stopped being able to understand what's real and what's not. He was having dreams about his brother, and he started playing mazes and monsters again so much that his dreams of his brother started morphing into dreams about mazes and monsters, and he started chasing this real life quest. And I feel like it's less that he was addicted, but that he just lost grip on what was real.
And what's cool is
depression.
This does not require us to make a reading of this movie that's not on the screen. That's the movie. And the movie really goes like that, whereas Christopher Makepeace, who we know from My Bodyguard, and Wendy Crewson, and I can't remember the name of the blonde guy, but they kind of,
I'm going to call him Todd from Days of Our Lives.
Okay.
I told Jason Daniel in the movie. I don't know.
Daniel in the movie. But I told Jason when I saw him, I'm like, that guy was on Days of Our Lives, and I looked it up. He was on Days of Our Lives from 1985 to 1986, and somehow that is in my brain still.
He's a hot guy. I mean,
maybe that's why, because he's very, very blonde.
Yes. They kind of got their stuff together. We can go back to the question of like exploitation and people's misunderstandings, but I just wanted to spend some time talking about like this movie doesn't seem to live up to that very much. Go ahead, Tony.
Well, I mean, I still think it certainly made my life kind of sucky when you have constant. It caused incarceration. If you look at the people who were put in jail for supposed abuse, and all because a special investigator said it was some things happened because of Dungeons and Dragons. You had Pat Bulling, who believed her son committed suicide because of it, and you had all these people picking up. And then again, Geraldo made a documentary, and there's all this stuff. I mean, it affected friends of mine who maybe this would have happened for any reason. It could have been anything, but I've told the story before where friends of mine got beat up for being in the woods camping out, listening to metal and talking about D&D because they were devil worshippers or whatever. So all this crap that was going on, that was this, in the same mix as, you had all the PMRC stuff going on around the same time. all of this was this mix of paranoia about, and it was youth culture. It was, what are the kids getting into? When in reality, what's hilarious about all of it is, yes, there are demons in Dungeons and Dragons. Yes, there are spells. But if you look at the number of people who learned about Satan and rituals through the Catholic Church, and more than a few occultists in their youth, they were, they'll say, I was really like the ritual of Catholic Church. And I went to Catholic and Baptist church. The ritual of that was interesting to me, the Latin, etc. And then as I saw this darker side kind of pulled me. But it had nothing to do with Dungeons and Dragons. But that was what, that's the thing that leads you to that. When it was actually like, where do people learn about the devil? Guess what? In church.
Yeah. But I mean, I remember
you don't have to have that in a campaign. You're fighting orcs and kobolds and crap. Like, but that's how it was spun. Was this. And what's funny is I've known people who have lost jobs and relationships because of things like EverQuest or Warcraft, but I never met anybody who lost a job or a relationship other than, hey, I'm not into nerd things, through Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. And I remember a buddy of mine in Washington, D.C. said that when he had been an RA in college, he had this young man who flunked out of school because he just got hooked on Donkey Kong. First of all, you can fixate on and ruin your life on damn near anything if you're just, if that becomes your outlet. There's two different thoughts here.
Donkey Kong Jr.
Two different thoughts here, because one of them was, the movie itself. So yes, the concept of the movie Mazes and Monsters is, hey, that movie was on TV last night and it's all about how D&D makes you a crazy devil worshiper. But if you actually watch the movie, the movie doesn't live up to that hype. The movie is
no. Well, the movie has nothing to do with they mention the occult, but they quickly that
basically just
pushed aside.
Yeah, they spend the entire time enforcing the idea that somehow it's making Tom Hanks's depression worse, and it's the source of his misery and whatever. When in reality, I think it's just sort of it was just what he happened to focus on when he had his psychotic break.
Well, and that's what his mom says. His mom says, that he was gonna have his episode regardless what he was actually acting out with.
Can you imagine if it had instead turned to Donkey Kong?
Yes,
where he's like having these dreams about an ape throwing barrels at him, and he's got to pick up hammers, and
or Pac-Man.
He's still got to go to the World Trade Center,
right? Where he's going to wander to a construction site that's trashed because of a giant ape is at the top with his girlfriend or his mom. And it's probably, given this movie, the woman would probably be his mom.
I love that his mom becomes the innkeeper's wife.
That is delightful. I know that the end is supposed to be hopeless and depressing, but I just thought it was kind of delightful, really. I mean, it's
jeez, man, for real.
Well, like, it's so weird. Like, they're like, oh, we got so sad seeing him again, so we followed him into the forest, and it was like we're losing hope of our best friend, whatever. He's never coming back. Like,
it's a
like,
bummer.
He's just, if you want to, come on, man. He's just sick. If you want to stick around and help him through it, there's like a few different. You can humor his delusions if you think that'll make him feel better, or you can try to help him get a grip on reality. But like, you're just being depressing. Come on, help him out.
Well, presumably the doctor that he's working with is helping him, but it doesn't seem like they've gotten very far.
I think he's had a relapse. Well, like, because some people, if they have delusions, they'll have good days and bad days. So that's what we're seeing here,
It could be even that he didn't have it until they showed up. Like, maybe that just drove him back into.
Oh, it might have been a trigger. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that goes back to the phrase. I mean, their approach is the phrase that I don't know if I thought it up or it was in the ether, where they just kind of go, well, at least we shrugged. Like, they didn't even try. They just went, so that's what I could go, oh, at least we shrugged.
Right. They're essentially like he's a ghost. Right. Exactly. And they're just going to grapple with him as a ghost. Yeah. I just wanted to note something else that we've tossed off several times here, which was that, glancing at the occult, right? And where I remember in my senior year, I was fighting with the sheriff of Lancaster, Texas. This just came back to me. I don't think I've thought about this in.
Was it over gold? Years. Was there a princess? Did you joust? Was there an arrow?
It was.
I know it's
It
not
was
Nottingham, but
over.
now it's all Robin Hood to me.
I have not thought about this in a long time, but the sheriff literally referred to me as, and I am not fucking kidding, young Henderson. And it was because I was fighting with the sheriff through a number of editorials that I wrote for the local newspaper about how even if various media were satanic, who cares? Because Satanism is protected by the Constitution. And the sheriff was angered at me, in the words of Al Capone, because I don't know, I guess that was just a stone's throw too far. But I was just like, well, first of all, who the hell cares if you're into Satan? I mean, big deal. I personally was not into Satan. I'm kind of not into much of anything, but I was just like, this is dumb. And I said, this.
So set the stage. The problem that you're running into again, and which has nothing to, again, what we're going to talk about is a lot of stuff that's not has anything to do with what the movie does, which it does poorly. Is what prompted a bunch of this is a very real. It wasn't real, but there was a panic going through a lot of the law enforcement channels of ritual abuse, which there was a big write-up to do with ritual abuse and people bringing up, and some of it real, and others people were being exploited, unfortunately, by people who wanted to exploit, hey, I'm going to use regression therapy, which was a new thing, and all of this stuff that fed into it. Often some people were actually abused, which was awful. But even worse was some people were taken advantage. And this idea that spread through, and again, there's a PBS documentary that talks about this, and it's way probably more succinct than this.
This sounds great, though.
But when you're talking about that, a big part of what pushed forward the Satanic Panic was the fact that what we're dealing with here with people who cared about the law and about saving people, etc., which the sheriff may or may not have, is all of these reports of, well, over here, I heard in this town there was, sacrifices, or there were people killing animals. And if you have that, you have there was this a bunch of people scared that basically this is the people from Race with the Devil, right?
Yes.
Who were ritually abusing children.
Yeah.
So if you let the Satanists into your community, you were letting ritual child abuse into your community. And that's, I can't tell you for sure, because some of it's just people hate counterculture. Yeah. But given what the actual Satanic Panic, the underpinnings that happened at multiple levels, what you might have been telling that sheriff is, let's let the ritual child abusers do whatever the hell they want in this town.
I'm sure. I mean,
you're arguing, I mean, there's a good, this sets up Jason the lawyer pretty well, as far as like, it's protected under the Constitution. Can't you understand, sheriff? But that was, all of that fed this hysteria. Yeah. And a lot of it ended up being some of it ended up being actual really bad stuff going on. Yeah. And some of it did lead to kids, with problems, abusing animals. There was a lot of ritual animal abuse that happened. Well, I don't care, this idea of, well, I'm stuck in this place, and, if Satan's going to give me power, then I'll do what I am going to do. So a lot of it is a lot of parents scapegoating things because that's an easy thing, rather than listening to their kids. Yes. And, and I'm not coming down on parents, but that's a lot of the stuff gets built up because, my parents actually asked me when I listened to a band called Suicidal Tendencies, and I told them about it, and they're like, okay, well, maybe that's not the best stuff for your way younger brother. Yeah. But, talk to me about it, whereas that doesn't happen all the time. But yeah, my guess is that's, all of that's underpinnings. Again, none of that's in this movie. This movie is about a guy who basically had really bad things happen, can't deal with reality, and turns to a extremely not how it works copy of Dungeons and Dragons.
It's so interesting that this is the movie that there's what the movie is. We were just talking about, and how the movie was perceived, which is something else. It's like they needed to make a movie like that, and this is the best they could come up with.
Well, the movie is the part of the movie that really leads to the reality of it is the detective.
Yeah.
Who's, again, the kind of Quincy character. Also just super old in this, comparatively. He is the Quincy of this movie.
You know who he is,
Like
by the
they,
way? That actor is Murray Hamilton. He's the mayor from Jaws,
and he's
as
great.
You know.
But his age demographic and how he approaches things is, I don't know if they really specifically targeted. They probably just wanted an actor of a certain age who could play this hardened cop detective, right? But his approach to the subject matter, these kids are going crazy and they're doing this thing, and really doesn't care if Tom Hanks' character he wants him to be safe, but he's more about, what are you crazy kids doing? And that is the demographic for who this movie is actually aimed at.
That's
interesting. Any kid who was watching at the time was like, oh crap, Because
there's something interesting. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead. No, you go ahead. I talked long enough.
Well, sorry. It's just like there's something interesting about the fact that he comes at these kids and he's interrogating them, and they've hidden all their M&M whatever stuff. Like it's D&D. They probably M&M is a horrible abbreviation.
But I think it's funny that it's M&M. Yeah.
Well, anyway, they hid all their stuff and they're pretending that they don't play this game with him, whatever. But it's he keeps interrogating them. He keeps talking about it bad, and they're all like, if he's in the caves, he's dead. And I'm like, he's not even in the caves. In the end, it didn't matter. He wasn't even in there. He left, and they barely put any effort into investigating where he actually went.
Yeah.
They're interrogating about what he was like, if he was depressed. He's dead if he's in the caverns. He's not even in the caverns.
Yeah, you're right.
That guy sucked. I hated that guy. Yeah, he was the worst. He's like, oh, for sure he's dead. I'm looking for the body, because if he's in there, then for sure he's dead. It's like, did you even try?
He was in New York. What the hell? It was just so infuriating to me. They're spending so much time with this guy being, oh, it's horrible, and he's giving all the speeches to be this is why D&D is bad, whatever. And they spend all this time just they take a chunk out of the movie where they just don't even really care about where he actually is, just to kind of rag on the game. And then they're like, okay, and now back to the drama of this guy who's not actually in the caverns and is killing a guy in New York, whatever. So.
Yeah, that's right. That he did kill that guy. I forgot about that.
Yeah, it was a psychotic break.
Who mugs him. So in theory, he killed somebody in self-defense, which is a thing you can do, and so it's awful and traumatic. But he's in trouble, but he needs to get himself to some help.
So I have a question for the panel. So a lot of the movie also is people's terrible relationship with their parents. So his parents have dropped him off. Hopefully they're just hoping beyond hope that this will be the college for him. Meanwhile, they're
his
arguing and stuff.
His dad doesn't care.
You've got another guy whose parents go, video games, that'll never be a thing. Joke's on you.
I love the mom.
I think my parents are. I think,
the kid's room whenever he leaves.
Yeah,
right, but she is kind of an absentee parent. So here's my question. Do you think that the target audience for this glosses, because what it's really saying is, hey, you should pay attention to your kids. That would be the best takeaway from this, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it was meant to go, look at those rich elitist parents? We're not that. We do look on our kids and we care, and that's why we don't want you to play D&D.
I got two quick observations.
Or do you think it skips to, hey, don't play D&D, and all of that just kind of melts into the background, and no one really cared about the actual what it's trying to set up, where almost every family, except the loving mom who's like, no, you should be a really tough daughter. You're perfect.
Yeah.
Give them hell against the patriarchy, which is great actually at the time. And I'm just curious what you guys thought.
I don't know. So the parents are all they're kind of all bad in different ways, except for, like you said, Kate's mom for some reason. And so, it's weird that, because, what's his name? JJ's mom redesigns his room every time he turns his back, because she's just, I don't know what her deal is. I think she's really materialistic. She's trying to like keep up with whatever's in vogue and whatnot, and then she doesn't really care about what he thinks. And she's like,
Right.
all of my clients would love to have a room like this. Don't you like
Yeah.
it? Don't you love it? And he's like adamantly like, no. And she's like, but don't you like it? And he's like, what the hell? And I'm like, okay. So it's all like, she kind of is trying, but she cares, but she's like trying in a weird way that only really like that only she would care about, and she like expects him to like it. And then, you know,
So when you go off to college and you come back and have redesigned your room, you won't be happy about that.
I mean,
no.
are you entirely at all right?
And then, like, Daniel's parents, I don't remember much about them. They were boring. They were having, like, dinner at the time and talking about whatever. And I'm like, okay. And then, of course, you know, Tom Hanks's parents are just yelling at each other and him the whole time. And I'm like, well, whatever. So it's like the whole time is just like these parents are all like variations on neglectful and bad. And so I guess that is like what you were saying, like, oh, so they weren't paying attention, so that's why their kids played D&D, and that's why this happened. And it's like, whatever, they were just having fun, and I don't think that the parents would have cared if they knew it was just a game. But it's like they weren't paying attention, and I guess that's supposed to mean that it's the failure on their part to not have noticed that they were playing this horrible thing and whatever.
Right. Well, that's kind of what I was asking. I wonder if, because one takeaway could be, hey, maybe we should really think about our relationships with our family. But I wonder, I don't think that many people had that takeaway.
It was like they only really visited the parents like a little bit. Like
Right.
they went back to the house to see the room changed a second time when they went to New York, and they talked about it very briefly, but it's like it only came up in passing that she was redecorating again, and it was like,
well, I just love that
really
they call the mom of Tom Hanks's character just to go, hey, is he there? Oh, okay, he's missing, but don't worry about it. It's fine. Goodbye.
Right.
Yeah, so then you know the mom's like freaking out, going, "What the hell?"
Actually, I think that this movie is doing several things at once. I mean, first of all, it's like a network Sunday night movie, so it's a big deal. And the way movies like this, based on glossy, big fat, trashy fiction novels of the time, your Scruples, and because I'm really into this stuff. For one thing, the characters in these are always way richer than they actually would be in real life. You know, so and that's just because that's just the style of the period is that your main characters, even for characters that should be middle class, they're all going to be like Park Avenue apartments and everything. So that's quite normal. But what I think is really interesting is that the movie itself is people have accused it of being a sort of subversive parody of itself. Like once given to the actual people making the movie, they just had no interest. Like for instance, you guys mentioned that Kate is a character that's defiant of anybody's expectations of what your main female character of the era should be. She's just a regular college student who has it all together and plays D&D. You know, she's the one who has a romance arc, but you know, and so that you could say is that's a little bit cliched, but you know, she runs counter to, I think, a lot of your really sexist expectations of 1982. Just like the movie doesn't turn out to be as big an indictment of D&D as probably the people doing the PR for it kind of are selling it as. So it's just interesting to me that it cuts against those expectations.
Well, I don't want to derail you, but one thing that I do find now that you bring
that
that
was
up,
my whole thought. So go ahead. Yeah.
Well, now that you bring that up, though, you know, she's so much stronger, I think, than you might even make the same character today, which is weird because it's mainstream, but because obviously through how they filmed D&D, no one knew what D&D actually was, or they had no interest in what it actually is, because it's kind of boring to people who aren't playing.
Absolutely.
I mean, when they're painting characters, they're painting these cardboard cutouts. They're not painting miniatures. It's all of it
interesting.
Some filtered.
Yeah, that was weird.
None of that. Like nobody plays with all those
cutout.
candles and it. But anyway, her character, I think now the shorthand is usually like a really nerdy girl who probably would have glasses and maybe like I also like these other pop culture fantasy things. Whereas Here,
me.
she's
She'd be me.
frustrated because no one's taking her seriously. And
Yeah.
she's like, hey, you know, I push guys away because am I too pushy? Am I too strong? And the answer is no. I think that's awesome if you actually, you know, if you're cognizant. But and
Yeah.
it does play against a lot of things of the time. She's probably the most well-rounded
Yes.
of
Mhm.
you know, she's not she only questions her role in the world in the way that it's a gender role question of, look, why don't I have what here's what I want. Why is society pushing against that? Which is
Yeah.
a way cooler movie than, than the rest of the movie. Like
Right.
her arc and her character are that thing would be a way better movie than what we actually get, which is
What did we watch,
mess.
Tony? What was it recently that we watched where we were like, you know, honestly, I would be happy just keeping these characters and ditching the rest of the plot. You know, because I know we've had that experience before, where you're like, once they introduce like the main characters and we have them up until whatever element comes in that makes the movie into the movie itself. Yeah, I like these guys. I would like to hang out with them. They seem pretty cool, you know. And yes,
well,
is it normal?
Her and the character, you know, the guy who's like, hey, I'm a pretty boy, and I get trapped into that. And on the one hand, like growing up not having that many girlfriends, you know, and even the other guy's like, oh, boo-hoo, right? That really nerdy kid. Oh man, it must be hard for you. But in reality, everybody has their own crap going on, right? So this guy, we don't know. He may have been I don't get the impression he was one of the jocks from Trick or Treat, right?
Right.
He's just always like, things are easier for him because he's this hunky blonde guy.
Mm-hmm.
But what we find out is, hey, that can be an anchor for him because everybody expects this kind of one normative role.
Yeah.
And, you know, eventually he falls into that. Hey, I'm going to be the software engineer that my parents always said I was going to be.
Isn't that interesting?
Like,
you're right. He does.
Dude,
yeah.
Guess what? Richard Garriott made tons of money off of Ultima. Yeah. It's hilarious because even then we were starting down this path where computer gaming was actually gaining a foothold.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of funny that they tried on that and then went, no, you should do spreadsheets or whatever they think that he should.
Well, they clearly don't have any idea what they're talking about.
Right.
Anyway.
But
like
as a person who's made their life in the games industry.
Yeah, it's the early 80s. This stuff is just starting out. They don't really know that it's going to get so big.
But they don't even know. My point is the writers of it. This is like Bob Haney, who used to do, it was one of many 40-something writers at DC Comics who wrote a bunch of teen characters. Sometimes they were great because sometimes teenage versus older themes are universal, so you can just keep telling the same story decade after decade. But sometimes it was ridiculously off kilter because these are old dudes in like khaki pants and with gray hair, and they're trying to figure out how the kids today are going to talk. The person who wrote this script does not know jack shit about what it means to be into computers, or they need a computer engineer from MIT versus making gay. They don't know what that means. They just
thankfully they didn't have the time or the budget to do what a lot of people would do, where they show him at a computer with something just really heinous and stupid that has nothing to do with any computer thing ever. Luckily, they just go like, they don't even care enough about that. So I was thankful for that.
Yeah.
Although,
they
by the way,
still do that. By the way,
well, they do a lot of that with like Willow and like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. She just pulls random stuff from her computer, and it's like, I don't know where you got that.
My favorite thing that ever happened with a computer in a high school movie is in Pretty in Pink, when Andy is sitting down at the library and all of a sudden like this picture of her appears on the screen in the library, the computer that she's at the library. And then, first the person starts talking to her. They're just like entering a chat room without having intended to do so. There's just suddenly like, hey, whatever. Then she's like, do you know who I am? And it's suddenly a magical picture of her appears on the screen. And then she's like, do you know who you are? And suddenly magically transitions to a picture of him, Andrew McCarthy. And it's like, I still don't know how to do that. That's still not a thing you can do.
Although he was, Although I did have
secretly.
I did have a friend who, much more low-key version of that. He was really smart, but really lazy. So he got really bad grades, but he was really smart. So he set up this system when computers were fairly new, and he basically had it randomly say something about the principal. It would randomly just pop up like, Principal Skinner, eat my shorts or whatever, And
oh my god.
and it came up. It was completely random, so it actually came up one time when the superintendent was there, and it started coming up on all the computers. But what was even better was because my friend was known as a slacker, they asked him, like, did you see anybody in there? There must have been a hacker. And he was like, they're like, we know it's not you, but if you hear of anything, let us know.
That's hilarious.
Right.
He's the Kaiser Soze of computer hackers.
But it did actually like set up a pseudo hack. I mean, back then it was easy to do, and it was a very low key hack. It wasn't super network or whatever, but it was a really great because it caused such a scandal because it was the superintendent. Just happened to let's check out this new computer lab that we paid lots of money for.
Too funny.
Why does it say Principal Skinner licks whatever or whatever it was?
Okay,
awesome.
I'm curious. This movie, and we've only paid just glancing attention to the actual plot, but it doesn't matter. We require that our listeners promise that they've seen the movie, because there may be spoilers, but it does not mean we'll necessarily go through the movie. But
we don't make them promise that they've seen it. We just make them acknowledge that
they do not have to click
we're
on
spoiling
anything.
it for them.
There's no wrapper where they say I've seen Mazes and Monsters.
Yeah.
My question
Otherwise, a lot of people are going to be like, "Uh-oh, I'm not supposed to."
You don't have to see Mazes and Monsters.
I have a question for Julia Sophia, and that is, this movie exploits a stigma, right? That's where. And my question is, if I were a rich Hollywood dude and I gave you $7 million and said, "Hey, go exploit a current fear for money," what would you make it about? Because it's not going to be D&D. Nobody's afraid today about that. So what would you exploit? Would it there's a million things that you could exploit. So what would it be? What do people give like an unfair rap to?
Something to exploit today. I don't know. Because it's like there's a lot of there's the fact that a lot of kids vape now. So,
Right.
Where most people it would be a popular thing to smoke cigarettes or whatever. Everyone I know who smokes vape. They vape. So I've seen a ton of hilariously terrible, exploitative, fear-mongering anti-vape commercials that are super this'll kill you. It's horrible. And they're so laughably bad. It's like anyone who sees that, if they vape, they don't care.
Right.
They're not going to stop because they saw this commercial. And it's
Right.
there's a lot of that sort of thing where it's in terms of vaping, it's actually bad. It's not like a harmless thing like playing a role-playing game. It's actually a thing that can harm you, and they're just, using it, but they're just trying to actually ward people off of doing it.
Good point.
But they're doing it in such a way that no one cares.
It's a good point that you can exploit.
Really poor.
Well, you could exploit a real fear that's a real fear that is reasonable, and you could even exploit it unreasonably, or you can exploit reasonably or unreasonably an unreasonable fear. And this was an unreasonable fear. Anyway, okay, so vaping, can you think of any others? A lot of money on the line. What can we exploit? What can we get people to be afraid of? And I don't know. I'm just the thing is, the funny thing
all
is
the
the Satanic Panic is
stuff.
dead.
All the transgender stuff.
Okay, gender exploration. Yeah. Boy, that would be rough. It would be very difficult.
Something came out now, exploiting fear over anything sexuality or gender related. It'd be a huge disaster, because especially now with the internet and everything being PC, they would be ripped to shreds for sure.
Yeah,
It could happen, and it does even happen. Sometimes there are certain things out there that are super being transgender is a horrible thing, whatever, and they're kind of, I don't know any off the top of my head but I've definitely seen them around that they're super and it's always just everyone who's seen it that is will tear it apart because it's really horrible. Sure. And why are people supposed to be so afraid of being gay or whatever? There's all these old, anti-gay ads from maybe the 50s or something.
The 40s.
That are super weird.
Mike
and you're 40s. And it's
yeah.
okay. You look at them now and you're well then,
Yeah.
that's weird. And it's like there's all this stuff to like. If you were to make a movie today, a lot of money, like about being worried about someone being transgender, it'd probably be something along the lines of like, you don't know who they are anymore. You have to change everything you know about them, learn new pronouns, a new name, whatever. It's all terrible, and it's like that would be the sort of thing that's kind of like.
No, but the fear that they actually pounce on or whatever is the fear that they're going to hide in the bathroom and like.
Oh yeah, well,
people.
there's that too.
You could exploit that. You know,
what I mean, again, you get this, and there's a bunch of fundamentalist stuff that happens. You would get that fear, and usually the exploitation for that now would be this kind of faux. We're worried about you.
Oh yeah.
So the way that they would do it would be these people, and using the term they would use, these people that we're concerned about, air quotes all over, don't even know who they are, and isn't that terrible for them and for their families? So let's make a thing where it really is about them not knowing, like they just pitiable and blah blah blah, which is awful. But that's the way that a lot of like really fundamentalists, because you still have like, I mean, Kirk Cameron and Scott Baio are still making crazy.
Well, that's
crap.
true. It would be done like a Lifetime movie where it would be called something like I Don't Even Know My Daughter Anymore. And at the beginning she would be normal, and then something would happen and you'd lose touch with her, and then pronouns and blah blah blah. But because it's the kind of movie we're talking about, eventually she would either die like a Jack Chick tract, or you would rescue her and it would be back to normal.
And it would be a deep programming. All of that is terrible. But if you were to say, like, how would that happen?
Yeah, well, it's real, too. Like, I have a trans friend who told me that, his parents were only sending him to gender therapy to warn him of the dangers of taking hormones that he could transition with. And he's like, what dangers? It's like it's going through puberty again. He's like, yeah, that's the point. And it's like all this weird stuff that's what they would pry on. Like, transitioning can be dangerous. You go through surgeries and hormones that could be a problem, and you don't want your child to go through that, whatever. And it's all this stuff that's like that's kind of the point, though. Like, so not the danger necessarily, but the transition is the point.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about this because I remember David Bowles and I talked like 3 years ago about exploitation. Like, is it right? Is it moral to make a movie that exploits people's fears, even if you know that it's bullshit? And
I mean,
I don't know the answer. I truly
there's
don't.
levels of that. There's exploitation where you're exploiting. You're like this movie. Again, I do want to steer it back to, hey, we're talking about music.
Let's come back to this movie. But I think this is an interesting question. Like, is this movie moral? Is it moral to make a movie like this?
I don't even know if it goes into that, because at the point where it's this much commerce, like, I mean, no one who's really making that. You're asking people whose job it is to not be moral and to only care about numbers to make a moral decision. That's a fallacy right there.
Right.
Like, there's very little morality in the top levels of whether or not something makes money or not.
Yeah.
There are people, and, but again, that's not really if you're counting on a studio to be moral,
No, I guess you're right.
You're looking at the wrong part. Now, but I think there's a difference between exploitation of fears, like a movie, there's a bunch of internet fear movies, Unfriended, and that's just one that popped up recently that I saw, and I was like, oh yeah, there's a bunch of them. Like, this stuff happens, happens on the dark web.
That's right. Yeah.
There's Cam, which is about a cam girl and her experiences, and some of it's about the very reality of it, but also exploiting the fear of what happens if it goes wrong, right?
Well, and likewise, every one of those great movies where your roommate, you get a new roommate, but they become obsessed with you, and then eventually you have to like push them off of a balcony to save yourself. Those movies are great, and I love them. But let's be honest, they exploit the hell out of mental illness,
right? And that's I think there's movies where we're all kind of, ooh, that's scary about the internet, right?
Yeah.
And then there's exploitation of, you don't know what these people who are the other. A lot of that, the thing you're talking about is fear of the other and how it's going to affect you and encroach on your rights or your humanity or your sense of security.
Yes.
And that's where I think a lot of the gray area happens. In this movie, it happens because, if your kids are playing D&D, it might start innocuous, like, look, what kids are crazy, they're going into a cave.
Yeah.
And then the thesis seems to be, well, maybe it doesn't affect everybody, but it affected this one kid enough that he was willing to go stab somebody because he thought they were a monster. Talk to talk to the homeless who were living underground. And even the homeless guy is like, whoa, what is happening with this guy?
Yeah.
And then, possibly commit suicide. And then having his brain irreparably damaged. They care very little that Dungeons and Dragons was the catalyst, and it could have been anything. Again, he could have lost his scholarship because of Donkey Kong, but that's not where we're at. It had to be Dungeons and Dragons because that was the thesis of this detective in real life.
Yeah.
And some of the law enforcement, I think it was in Louisiana in real life, it's the cult, it's this or that.
And that's where the money was. I mean, that was what was hip to talk about at the moment.
Well, again, Geraldo doesn't make a special unless he thinks it's going to be, famous, right? So this is, and even when you see the youth getting corrupted, not by Dungeons and Dragons anymore, when they don't have time, because they're putting it off, like, we don't have time to play Dungeons and Dragons anymore. Mazes and Monsters, sorry.
Yeah.
And,
we can just call it D&D.
Yeah. Well, they don't, here they don't have time to play Mazes and Monsters, but they're circumventing the law by protecting themselves.
Yes.
So by having to falsify their story, kids will do anything. I mean, they won't even help the police,
right?
Because they want to cover it up because they're afraid for their friend, because they know the kids know they've done something wrong, right?
Yeah.
So once they're into that section of the movie, this is your grandparents watching, or your parents watching Quincy, and any number of other things, and going, see, the kids don't respect authority, or else they would have told them everything they're doing, because if they weren't doing something wrong, they wouldn't have to hide it. And that's where,
which is hilarious, because those parents, by the way, would be baby boomers, which is to say the original rebels, at least of our era. But whatever, you're totally right.
But that's where this movie leads, is now they're trying to find their friend, but they have to have a smoke screen and they can't be, they don't want to admit they went into the caves, which will get them probably kicked out of school, because they're told not to do that, because there's, kids have died in there. They have to hide all their Dungeons and Dragons accoutrements as if it's drugs, which
right.
More than willing to have a crazy party with a 16-year-old who even by then was underage.
Yes.
Yeah.
And by the way, the guy wearing, he wears different hats all the time.
All the different, funny. I love those hats.
It's funny because I know a guy who had Fantastic Fest, like his friend, but I met him, and you'll see this, this one friend, like, I was like, oh man, it's him. Because he has, for a long time, he would actually have different hats in his trunk.
Really?
Like, before I could remember his name, because I'm terrible with names. He was a friend of mine. We met at some parties, and then we would always talk about films at Fantastic Fest. That's where you catch up. But he would have, like, throughout the day, he would have at least 3 or 4 changes of hats. And so seeing this was like, oh, that guy.
That's his thing.
Yeah,
and good for him, to have a thing. And I, by the way, I want to correct
they're nice.
something.
They're cool hats, but it was funny to see this guy doing that, because he's on he's got his own stuff going on. But the hat thing is hilarious.
Well, and the great thing is, though, that's actually these are great coping mechanisms for everybody who's not Tom Hanks. They play the game until they get too busy with dating and studying to play it every night. He's going to wear hats. Okay. He's going to wear hats. He's trying to find his identity. That's okay. He's a 16-year-old genius at university.
Yeah.
So
Daniel mentioned the thing at some point, like they work out their issues in the game and then they leave it behind and then they live their normal lives. That's sort of what it's supposed to be.
Yeah,
I don't know.
For what it's worth, whatever the hell that means, we work out our issues in the game. Definitely sounds like something written by somebody who has no idea what the hell they're talking about.
Yeah.
But
well, Daniel says it's like, I'm being a different person and not my father, and I'm working that out in the game. Like, okay, whatever. Sure.
Yeah, but that's literally the only lip service that gets is right there. Like nothing ever. They never have some deep conversation in the caves about
ever. There's no breakthrough moment. I would love a Breakfast Club style moment where they each of them breaks down about some truth behind their character. Fine, that would be great. Then we wouldn't have time for Tom Hanks to go nuts, but that would be interesting.
The moment where they all break down, and then one person's like, "Oh, this is not about kobolds anymore."
Are you guys going to be nice to me on Monday? No, We're going to ignore
We're not
you.
going to be friends. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
That
Oh, my
the chief necromancer, I didn't realize that was your dad.
He's your-
Maze controller. Oh my. Yes.
Yeah.
Like,
Maze
it's
controller.
all like the base controller dungeon master. That would be, I'm sure it's happened in the history of ever, that some campaign is written by somebody with a lot of family problems, and then eventually somebody in the campaign, they're talking outside of it going, oh my, that's his mom, right? Like the chief, like the evil witch.
The thing is, I can't think of
I'm
this
sure that's
concept.
happened at least once.
Tony, I can't consider that concept without it being funny, unfortunately. I mean, like suddenly the guy is going, that's right, Brenda. I didn't take out money on Friday night because you wanted to go out. I'm sorry. Am I psychic or something? You know,
or it'd be more like, since the person, controls the campaign, it'd probably be more like, you stab her right through her stupid heart, and Barry is going to have to raise the dead. You're like, is it Barry or
right?
his mom's boyfriend?
By the way,
Baronimus, the destroyer.
I feel the need to break in here and annotate 2 comments I made. Number one, the parents of these guys would not be baby boomers. I'm sorry. I apologize. They would be like a little bit older than baby boomers. They'd be like whatever the hell that is. Whatever that lost generation between the greatest generation of the baby
silent
boomers.
generation, I think.
Thank you. Yes, the silent generation would be the parents of Tom Hanks, because they're like
schooled by his daughter.
Yes,
virtual
that happens. That happens several times a day.
Virtual high five there.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. There was there was one more correction that I wanted to get in, and now I've forgotten what. Oh yes, I'm sorry. For those of you who are very, very young, the reason why you would be arguing with your girlfriend about forgetting to get money on a Friday night is, believe it or not, there was a time when if you were going to have money to spend on Saturday and Sunday, you needed to go and get it on Friday afternoon before the banks closed. Otherwise, you had no money for the weekend.
Because there weren't ATMs.
There were no ATMs. So
or any digital transfer of funds.
You know what else was a reality, and that's in the time that these guys are in this college, is if you're out partying and you run out of money, you go home, because again, there's no ATMs. There's also
nobody has a credit card.
No credit cards. No.
Well, the credit cards exist, but young people don't have them.
Yeah, nobody
credit
at the college age.
Oh, yeah.
Rich. Yeah. All the people who have credit cards would be the rich jerks in Pretty in Pink and those kind of movies.
But even then, not everybody takes credit cards. It's not like, because like you said, there's no mobile transfer. So if you're going to use a credit card, you're going to go to a store where they're going to have one of those metal plate thingies, and they're going to make a carbon copy of your card, and then you're going to sign that. But that's not a thing you can just do at the bar, or you can just do at whatever. Like, certainly no Venmo. I mean, it's just
That's oh man, the credit card carbon copy device is a thing that I want to see somebody not our generation pick up and go, wait, what?
Kids react to credit card machines. Yeah.
Because
gotcha.
And I've had to run one of those for a job. It's terrible and sucky, and that whole process, mostly at gas stations, because that's where you're more likely to have a gas credit card. And it was only for gas, and especially if you did a lot of traveling.
Your stupid Texaco card, yes, absolutely.
Well, and that shows up in Reality Bites when they're in college. Winona Ryder's in college, and she gets a gas card from her dad, and so she goes to the gas station and runs other people's gas on her card, and has them pay her in cash so that she can get cash. Because she was like, "What do you mean I'm going to get gas?"
All of that is very, very time stamped. We actually see nothing of the commerce of these people except for one thing, which is that Tom Hanks makes it to New York from wherever the heck this college is. That is not Toronto, but is filmed there. He makes it to New York with zero cash. He has coins for using the phone booth.
No,
he left behind his phone booth. Oh, that's right. Okay,
he doesn't.
Yeah, he pulls them out of the change thing.
Oh no, because
I'm going to presume that he
doesn't even have his wallet.
He calls collect. Yeah, he calls collect.
Okay,
which again is another timestamp thing.
Yeah.
Where you would sometimes call collect, or if you needed somebody to call you back, you would go, Tony's parents call me back.
Yes.
Here we have a collect call for Tony's parents call me back. And everybody knew, like, it's not like the operator didn't know exactly what the hell was going on. But
and then they would reject the call, and then they would call you back. Yes. And the whole reason for that rigmarole was that collect calls were more expensive than long distance. God. Hey, do you remember the period? You know what? Okay, I'm going to say this real quick, and then we'll move on. But do you remember the period, like for like 5 minutes, when everybody was into like calling cards and special 800 numbers for cheaper long distance? That was weird. It was like it happened for like 5 minutes, and then it was over.
So in other countries, especially Japan, by the way, that stuck around for a lot longer because a lot of phones, even in people's houses, were kind of a payphone of sorts. So for a while, you would see collectors collecting anime phone cards because they had like cool prints. And they would issue all these like that was a mode of commerce for
I had a phone card. And when I went to France to study abroad, I had a phone card and a metro card, like, card to take the train and the bus. And I had them in my pocket. I had the phone card stuck into the metro card holder because there was like a little special holder thing. And I used that phone card all the time to call my parents, to call whatever. And some guy pickpocketed me. He put his arm around me and just started talking to me, and I was like, get away. And then my card was gone. Both my cards. It was like the worst thing ever because I was like, I'd lived off those two cards.
Right.
Anyway.
I'm sorry that happened.
I know. It sucked.
So yeah. Back to Mazes and Monsters. I think we've probably hit on everything. We should probably touch briefly on the performances, just to the extent that we haven't already. Tom Hanks is really Tom Hanks. I mean, he's the lead. Well, no, actually, you know what? He's not the lead. We say he's the lead because he's the most famous, but let's be honest, he is not the lead. It's an ensemble story.
It's an ensemble, yeah.
And these guys are, and one of the characters goes crazy.
He's the lead according to the box now.
Yes,
because he's Tom Hanks writ large. Like the Trick or Treat, where it's Gene Simmons and or Ozzy, depending on which cover that you find. When in fact both of their performances are tiny parts of that movie.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's 4 people. It's Tom Hanks, Wendy Crewson, David Wallace, and Chris Makepeace. And they are, they each have their storyline. And really, if there's a lead at all, because this is a Rona Jaffe book, it's actually Wendy. It's Wendy Crewson playing Kate. She has, the first boyfriend and the second boyfriend. It's her story. And
by the way, she plays the first lady in Air Force One, in case anybody's trying to place her.
By the way, the gall at the end, if people want to talk any kind of Mary Sue-esque kind of stuff, at the end where she goes, and yes, I'm going to be famous for these books.
Yes.
Just all of that stuff at the end where she's talking like, oh, wow, 4 days of writing, huh? We get this? Great. Yeah. Okay, thank you. I mean, I guess it worked out all right, but still, that you got to have some confidence to write in your character who's may or may not be you and say, I'm multi-millionaire writer or whatever.
There is a long tradition of that because, just all of basically the thing is, in movies and books and TV, being a writer is like a super awesome profession. That's and so because it's like you don't have to explain anything behind it. You just go, oh yeah, no, she's a writer now. She's working on her latest book. She's doing whatever, and it just explains a whole lot. And that character is kind of taken care of. That's the whole stat sheet for that character, writer. And so that's what's going on there is that Rona Jaffe thinks and is right that it's a sexy profession in these kind of books. For reasons unexplained.
Okay, and so slightly off topic, but you mentioned stat sheets, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the actual game.
Okay,
because it's very weird. Because I first when I went in to watch the scene when they were introducing their characters yesterday, and then when I revisited the full movie, I was just noticing everything about the game they were actually playing. It's sort of like a D&D game, but they have this whole mode of decorum where they're all being very serious, and Daniel explains his role as like May's controller very seriously in a way that I've never heard any dungeon master say ever. And I guess it's for exposition for the movie, but still. And like the way that all the characters introduce their characters is also weird, because they don't really bring up like stats or anything. They say, they all give these weird little speeches like, I have wit and magic to take me far and protect me, and I'm like, what? No one talks like that. And
Only
then there's
the theater
this
kids would introduce their characters like that,
right? And then there's the whole setting of like, they're sitting at this table covered in candles, and they make reference later to dice and like maps, so clearly they're using dice and maps, but they have no room for dice and maps because they have a table covered in candles.
Yes.
So what the heck is going on? I don't even know.
Yeah, that's the point in the game where they pause to clear the candles so they can do everything else.
Yeah.
Well, I did like that the DM's got that little wall to hide his own notes. I mean, that
that is
like
a thing that
cool.
people do in real life.
Yeah.
A DM for campaigns I used to have had a really cool one that I would spend hours during our campaign studying that little wall, because it had dragons and sorcerers all over it, and I was like looking at it, because like while people are talking, you don't really have anywhere to look except at a thing. So that is a real thing, and I liked his. It looked like a little like castle wall. It was nice.
Yeah,
it was a little short though. You could still see directly over it, so whatever.
Usually it's just, I mean, for people who didn't have enough money, it was usually just the fold out from the campaign module that you were
and you stand it up, right?
My friends who were running the campaign that I played most recently just used like a cut apart cardboard box or something.
Right.
So
I've been there too. Now, what's funny is the actual. This works for nobody who's actually played D&D. You're totally right, because while the demographic has changed and perhaps some of the snacks have changed, the people playing D&D, I would say it's a little less nerdy than it may have been before. But the actual playing of D&D, anybody who introduced their character like that and was flat out serious, the rest of the people at the table just kind of look at each other like, oh, we've got Jim
it's so much less
Stu is gonna yes, it's oh so serious. There would just be more of a collective sigh, and afterwards everybody would go, oh man, are you for real?
I've never encountered a campaign ever that is like that serious with that level of decorum. Like not even DMs at like Enchanted Grounds who are actually running it for strangers and they want to have it like be semi like professional so that everyone can play along. No one's that, I don't know, serious about it. It's always fun. Like you have snacks. Enchanted Grounds is a cafe, so you get food and coffee. And so you're drinking something, you're eating something. I used to play a campaign that was run out of a library. So every time I went to that game, I got Mountain Dew and like sour gummy worms out of the vending machine and was snacking on those the whole time. It's like... It's like it's super. Everyone,
champions right there.
So much more fun. Like you're just hanging out, playing a game, and usually snacking.
Right. That's great. I think it was more likely Coke. I mean, at the time there were very few, so it was more likely Coke and Pepsi, and probably like Doritos.
Yeah, Fritos for sure.
Fritos,
yeah,
sure.
But I mean, none of that. All of that has been a constant, which is awesome. Although I say I wouldn't say jealous, but perhaps envious that it's so people are so readily able to find a game now, whereas the whole point of this, this movie shows and kind of where we grew up was, although it solidified kind of your nerd tribe and hey, we're going to do this. There was a stigma to it. So I don't have time now, but I think it is really cool that we live in a world where, hey, I'm just going to go play D&D. And not only that, but there's, people making, again, with, Critical Role and there's several others. I mean, even working for Rooster Teeth, we had our own Dungeons and Dragons show for a little bit, and all of that is really cool. I wish that it had been that easy, but I like seeing that the world has moved on to where that's not an issue facing people today. That's That's really great. I
Mhm.
I'm not.
They're kind of
I hate that
yeah.
gatekeeperiness of like, well, we had to blah blah blah. Like, no, I'm fine with all of this being mainstream, and I don't.
Absolutely.
If people are enjoying
Yeah.
themselves, like, why do you care if you're gonna be that person?
Yeah,
It's
that's wonderful.
Yeah, like the rule books are pretty easy to find. Like the actual books, if you're going to buy them, are kind of expensive, but
Sure.
there are full-length PDFs of the Player's Handbook, fifth edition, that you can find like for free on like Google or whatever if you really look for it. And you're like, so you don't. It's all like much more accessible. And you will make. I have friends that also like to play D&D. So one day my friend tells me, "Hey, we're thinking of starting a campaign. Are you in?" I'm like, "Yeah, sign me up." So let's do that. So then we meet on Fridays and play together because it's just sort of way easier. We're all nerdy anyway, so no one cares.
Right. Well, it's been interesting too because this really amazing concept artist is set next to me. When we were still going to the office, he was telling me, "Hey, we're playing this." A campaign where we're trying to figure out, well, how do you have, sci-fi kind of stuff, but in a D&D setting? And I was like, oh, well, have you seen this module, which happened way back in the day? And then I turned him on. I was like, hey, have you played Star Frontiers? Have you played Gamma World? And some of those are out of print, but there's also a couple of companies that sell. I bought I think second edition of Cyberpunk because I couldn't find my box of manuals from a company, and I ended up getting the book, but I also bought the PDF. So if I need to, I can just print it out. And that the companies that are legit have have an in with a bunch of RPG companies. So if you don't care if you're going to read it on your iDevice or tablet anyway, or your computer, you may not need to kill some trees. So there's a lot of companies where the PDF's actually pretty cheap. So, you give your money to the company and you get a PDF of it, which, wasn't even a thing you could even think about. You had to finding a place to finding a place to cheaply photocopy character sheets was a thing back in the day.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Now you don't.
It's also, I feel like it's also kind of worth it to mention that like sci-fi D&D things are also like stuff like that is also easier to find, like you were saying. But you'll also find stuff like in the past I've played Doctor Who based like role-playing games that they're literally like rule books and pre-made character sheets for actual Doctor Who characters, and you play against actual monsters, and you can do that. We also played one that it wasn't a pre-made thing. It was like a modified one that our DM kind of modified some of the rules and stuff out of a different sci-fi thing to make it a Firefly game. And we played it like it was Firefly.
Oh, cool.
And there's a lot of different things where you can like modify the worlds, make it like this one anime we did one time or whatever, or we played as like a modification on the Scooby Gang from the Scoobies from Buffy the Vampire Slayer and stuff like that. And there's like a ton of different modifications that you can make yourself or find. There's rule books for variations on role-playing games. There's not even just like D&D is like the most famous one, but I've also played one called Pathfinder.
Yeah, Pathfinder is great.
That is also pretty popular and it's pretty similar, but also has some key differences in the character sheets and rules and stuff that I've played. And it's like there's a lot more to choose from and it's way easier to find.
Well,
and I don't think they really bring up like that any of that. I don't know if any of that.
Well, nobody making this movie knew any of that.
No, of course not.
But what strikes me when we close out, when we do our endorsements, I want to wrap up and get our final thoughts, but I also want to get endorsements because there are a couple of really funny videos that I hope that we can post on our page. And I haven't seen this one in years, but there was one they ran on SNL years ago where they just had a recording of a bunch of people playing D&D. And it had this long intro about, now you're going to see what really goes on in these sessions. And then really the whole like 3-minute sketch was just the guys arguing about, basically Mountain Dew. Like,
there was also the really famous one where they eventually animated it, and it was the one.
That's
guy
the one I'm thinking of. Yes,
like,
yes.
Oh, you mean like can I do her? Like
yeah.
I shoot at the darkness. Okay. Yeah, that was the ultimate. Again, if anybody had bothered to go to any actual Dungeons and Dragons session, they would have seen that.
Doing the funny voices.
Sometimes there's
the
serious
best
campaigns and stuff, but but that, and again, we were playing a bunch of different things. Palladium had a great system, and I mean, if you want to talk occult, there's a really great source book called Beyond the Supernatural. And what was really cool about a lot of that stuff was Beyond the Supernatural had a lot of stuff about ley lines, and because you want to make this huge campaign, so you basically got several library books worth of information distilled into a source book, where even when I wasn't playing it, I thought it was really cool to read about.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's a lot of
And
fun
that
to
was
look through
always
those rule
awesome.
books.
And the one I was thinking of also, well, I haven't found the one that was animated, and that was an awesome. Roll a D6 was hilarious.
I love that song.
Roll a D6, which is based on the Like a G6.
I can't hear that. I can't hear Like a G6 without thinking of that parody. It's the only thing that comes to mind.
And it's really great, and it's got
It
this, these very awesome people playing D&D. It's a funny video, so we got to post that. All right, let's get our final thoughts. Julia, Tony, Sophia, and then me. So Julia, to start with, I know we've gone far and wide, so if there's anything you feel like we need to bring attention to about Mazes and Monsters, which people can watch included in their Prime, so they can just go watch it on Prime. So final thoughts, Mazes and Monsters, Julia.
I think there are some darker themes that we didn't really get into all that much. We got into a lot of it, but not all of it. I really, the fact that he does kill somebody, is pretty, or at least stab somebody. I'm assuming the guy dies. That's pretty huge. I thought that he might have killed somebody in the cave when he first stabs the demon the first time, because he's seeing this demon. So he is, like Sophia said, having a psychotic break. He's actually having hallucinations and everything. And then when at the end, when he's just not the end, but when he before he gets when he's just crying and talking about that he doesn't know, like where he is when they're at the World Trade Center, he doesn't know what's going on. He's like blacking out. He's missing time. It's really a sad story. It really is tragic as far as that goes.
Yes.
And then but yeah, I think the D&D part is really interesting. Like I said, to me, watching the run around the World Trade Center was really sad, because I don't remember if I went when I was a kid or not, but I know that I've seen enough images of it over the years that it's just kind of like, it's just really sad to see it there. It's not there anymore. But I think I think there's some interesting things about it. And then the acting was not good. You asked about the performances earlier. I didn't feel like the acting was very good. Tom Hanks is at his worst, which of course, given that he's a multiple Oscar winner, is still really good because he's a good actor. But this is definitely like the beginning of him learning how to be a dramatic actor, because he was a comedian. But you can see that it's him, and you can see that he's going to be good eventually. But the rest of them are really quite awful. Even the people who we've seen in a million other things.
I was shocked.
Like,
Chris Makepeace is not that great, and Chris Makepeace is a decent actor.
Yeah.
I don't know. I thought that the actress Wendy Crewson, she actually is fine. I really did think she was totally.
Yeah, she's
fine,
okay.
But
I think I was glad to discover it. I was really surprised that this is what we were doing. I was like, "Wow, we're doing a Tom Hanks movie on the podcast!"
Yeah.
So that was a lot of fun.
Wonderful. Tony, final thoughts.
Well, I don't ever need to see this movie again, to be honest. I think it's interesting. I don't know. I'm interested how people think about, what we discussed in the podcast, because to me, the movie is not that great. And it was meant to be it's meant to be a very sensational movie. It could have been way more exploitative, to be honest with you. They could have started trying to summon the devil and stuff, but they weren't interested in that, because at the time that wasn't where the narrative was. It was more about, Dungeons and Dragons will take over your kids, and here's how it turns them bad. So the supernatural or occult part wasn't part of it. When the actual through line is mental illness, and I think you could do a lot more with that. I think this movie definitely is one of many that really took it to, oh man, are we really going here? Oh, look, heavy metal is terrible. Oh, Dungeons and Dragons, all this stuff that caused a lot of stigma, caused a lot of harm, based on faulty information by a lot of people cashing in or exploiting things in real life. And to me, if you wanted to do the research, to me, this movie is a great catalyst to investigate what really happened, and which is terrifying and awful, because it did affect a lot of people's lives and how they were perceived, and the people who started the Satanic Panic and what kind of real life exploitation they did. And again, how some of that went into a lot of psychosis and wrong psychoanalysis and all of that, and then the kind of how the church kind of ran away with it on tons of videos they were selling and about how it was evil and such. Especially in the Deep South, it ran. But also, I want to say that it's been really cool. I want to hear more about Sophia's final thoughts, because I think, like I was saying before, I think it's really interesting how that stigma is long gone.
Mm-hmm.
Along with stigma against video games, comics, etc. I think it's really cool that look, there's bigger issues to worry about now, right? But I think that this is of a time, and I'm fascinated what younger generations looking back at this will say. I don't think that's necessarily maybe our demographic for this podcast, but it would be interesting to see more media made by a younger generation who grew up on all of this not being stigmatized, and their views on the history of the Satanic Panic and what led to this. That would be, I would love to see actually spin-offs of that, in a kind of kids
really
are all right kind of thing. That would fascinate me.
I agree. I'd love to hear some Gen Zers just talking about their understanding of the Satanic Panic and stuff like that.
I mean, it'd be great. What I would really love is for somebody to really dive and go, hey, by the way, fellow people my age, in the way that the Gen Z version of a Ken Burns, where he really digs into a thing.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, my parents talked about Satanic Panic, and until I really dug into it, this is actually what happened, and really kind of.
Oh, I love that idea.
That would be fascinating.
Idea.
If there isn't a YouTuber person who's done something like that, there should be. But I feel like that's definitely a thing that some YouTube person who's gonna go into something like that, like movies like this, would talk about Satanic Panic or whatever.
Yeah. I'd love to see that. That would actually probably get me to
yet another good thing to if you find one, Sophia, we can post it on the page. And in fact, Sophia, what are your final thoughts?
Okay. Well, as a person who actually plays D&D, I thought that it was funny how, it was only kind of similar to the actual game in the movie, and in other respects it was vastly different. The fact that they seem to spend so much time, right at the beginning, they open with this, they're looking in the caverns, and this kid has apparently gone missing in the caverns. And again, as I said earlier, he's not even in the caverns. But also the fact that the detective tells this guy that's he's a reporter. He tells him right off the bat what's exactly is going on, and then he films right in front of the entrance to the cavern and talks about literally only D&D. He doesn't even really talk about the fact that there's a kid apparently missing in the cavern. So that's just a weird thing. And then they come back to that and they focus on it some more, and they focus on the fact that if he's in the cavern, he's dead. And he's not even in the cavern. And so, but so all of this, basically all of this to say, this movie's really weird. There's a lot of it that doesn't make sense. It kind of slightly fits into the Satanic Panic in the fact that it's weird about D&D and that it's bad, even though it doesn't really dwell on the occult at all. We were talking a little bit earlier about Jack Chick and how he was very much a part of the Satanic Panic being steered towards D&D. And I mentioned earlier, though I don't think it was on the show, about there's another movie that sort of has the same vibe as this called Dark Dungeons, but that came out in 2014 based on a Jack Chick comic of the same name that is way more occultist and way more anti-D&D than this is. It's all about whatever. The girls in that actually do learn real spells and get killed, kill people or whatever, something like that. It's really crazy. So it's all of the Satanic Panic stuff, for some strange reason someone decided to make a movie about it not 6 years ago. So it's funny to me. I'm this doesn't seem necessary anymore, but apparently people still care, so that's interesting. But yeah, in terms of the movie itself, I don't know. It's like, it was interesting looking back at this is very limited. The people who made this is very limited knowledge of what D&D actually is. And I've taken a look at like old rule books. My friend actually found her stepmother's old like players handbooks from like the 80s that like have like some old character sheets in them too, and they look very different, and they're kind of a lot more plain, and like they're less detailed and less fun than it is now, because I guess it's gotten more popular, and most of it is the printing quality. Like the old character sheets were very like, they were just filled with grids, whereas now like character sheets have like cool stylized like slots for stats and stuff like that and whatever. And so like looking into even the limited view of what D&D was back then, it's still kind of a view into what D&D was like back then. Even though, they're not even they don't do a battle like in the game. They don't show us them doing a battle. Like they don't roll, they don't move their they have these little cardboard cutout characters. They don't move them around on a map like you would in an actual battle in D&D. It's also the fact that they have cardboard cutout characters, which I've never really seen.
Only thing they encounter...
Like I've seen people have miniatures. And my campaign, we didn't have miniatures. We had these like 3D printed pucks that we drew on, but still.
Well, it's even funnier that even back then there were miniatures. The fact that they show them painting.
Yeah.
I mean, there was no research was done. They had them paint cardboard cutouts, but no one painted cardboard cutouts. I did have a collection of little cardboard. They were basically, you'd fold them into kind of cardboard triangles. Mm-hmm. So they were dual-sided. And those were cheap. And they were official D&D ones. And they had, they were color printed. They were nice, kind of glossy. But they were still cheaper than miniatures, so you could buy them if I didn't have any money.
These miniatures appeared to me to be like balsa wood,
but nobody
something like that. They were just weird and flat. And why are they painting them if they already have the characters at level 9?
Because somebody heard that they painted miniatures and no one.
Say more about that. What do you mean? Why would they paint them if they already?
I mean, okay, all right. Another point.
Like had them like 8 years ago.
Look, they've started this campaign. It's starting a new campaign, and I guess they were looking for another player just to pick up with old characters that they already had, and they're all at level 9. But like, you start a new campaign, that usually means you start with new characters. And if you don't, then that's like a special case, like you're just picking up with old characters at various levels. But whatever. Usually if you start a new campaign, you all start at level 0 so that you can level up together throughout the campaign. So that was weird like that. Like he plays at level 9, that's important because now they all have level 9 characters. So they introduce their characters to each other, which I guess makes sense because he's new and exposition. But it's like in terms of like in real life, you explain your characters once, kind of what your strengths are and like what your race class and background is, and then you talk about your name, maybe a little bit about your background. But all of this is usually done in the form of role playing, which I should also note. Like they do this weird introduction where he's like, I am the maze controller, I hold your fates in my hand, and then they talk about their characters, when in reality, when every campaign I've ever played in, we've always introduced each other's characters to each other in the form of role play. We meet up in a tavern and we start talking about ourselves. And we might introduce like our names and what kind of characters we are, but we don't really talk about our backgrounds and like this weird talking. She says the sort of something. Right. I don't remember. She got some speaking sword or whatever. Like, you don't really talk about that at the beginning of a campaign for no reason. Like, you don't really talk about your tools. So there's all this crazy stuff about, like, why are they painting miniatures now when these characters have existed for they're all at level 9, so you don't need to paint new miniatures. Why does it makes sense to me that maybe, like, Daniel and Kate and JJ all have little cardboard miniatures because they were playing together, but it doesn't make sense to me that Tom Hanks would also have a cardboard miniature painted in the same style, because until now he wasn't playing with them and no one had cardboard miniatures.
Well, we don't know.
So
in their
there's
universe,
like a million different things.
Maybe Mazes and Monsters universe, this is just how people roll, and they have cardboard miniatures.
Or maybe they all just decided, hey, you know what we should do? We should all get cardboard miniatures. Here's the model we're going to use.
But they're painting them like you need to paint regular
Right.
miniatures. So they have magnifying glasses and stuff for miniatures, quote unquote miniatures that don't need any of that. Again, it's the same thing where it's like computer stuff where people go, I have a 60 gigabyte mega RAM. and like no one, it didn't matter to the set designers as long as it had the trappings of what people do, because a parent or grandparent might have seen their kids, the youth of today, with their magnifying glasses and their paints and their miniatures and their toys and their rigmaroles.
It's so hard to keep track of all that stuff anyway. Like, I challenge you to keep track. If you have a kid who's into Magic the Gathering and you're not, I challenge you to keep track of what is being explained to you.
I had a friend who tried to teach me how to play Magic the Gathering. We only tried it once. I didn't get it, so never got into that one.
My thing that I got mad at was I did play some D&D, but I was really dirt poor in college, and I had friends who were spending a lot of money on Magic the Gathering.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And as much as my other friends who were stoners who were spending it on pot or whatever, in a lot of ways. And so I was always just... Or I would go, hey, why don't we go to a show? And they would go, oh, we're playing Magic tonight. And so I am very, very, very geeky and nerdy.
Oh, yeah.
But that was at that point in time, this is coming from somebody who was watching, VHS, whatever, Ninja Scroll, Vampire Hunter D, whatever else. So I can't cast the first stone, but there was something about Magic at the time where I just, the money, because I was so poor and there was no way I could spend it on cards. And then B, hey, let's go do something. Nope, I'm going to go tap some cards tonight. Even though it happened right at the time I would have gotten into the Magic the Gathering, that never was a thing for me. And again, whatever you want to do and have fun at, that's fine. But I never got into it because it was even geekier than and more expensive than I could afford at the time.
For me, it's always just been a matter of time. By the way, Tony, I really admire, and I'm not kidding you, I really admire your magnanimity towards everything, whether you like it or not. You're always like, you know what, somebody's into this, so I don't want to be too harsh. And I think that's really great.
I mean, I don't know if it's just people get so wrapped up on if this thing is valid or not. And I mean, to the point where you'll see people like, is this cool? Like, we live in a world right now where everything's cool and everything's not cool at the same time. So it's Wild West currently, especially now where everybody's trapped at home. So I don't know, whatever you do when you're staying at home, who am I to judge? Again, are you hurting yourself? Are you hurting others? Through inaction or action, are you causing harm? If the answer is I'm not causing harm, and that harm can be supporting somebody who's terrible, I wouldn't advise that. But that's sometimes hard we're seeing a lot of media reckoning as well as reckoning in the world.
That's a tough one, man. Yeah.
But I want to help. My whole deal is I want to help people, and I want to do as little harm as possible if I can. But I wasn't into it. I mean, there were some times when I got really angry. Like, really? You could go see this band and we're Magic the Gathering. Fine. Stupid Magic. But but that doesn't mean that it. I mean, you have to be aware that at the same time, I'm into heavy metal, which is talking about all kinds of fantasy stuff. And
it's just a personal choice. It was like you would rather
anime, and I'm playing Super Nintendo. Is Super Nintendo more valid than Magic the Gathering? Hell no. Yeah. That's ridiculous.
No. Well, basically, if I were to watch through the movie again, I'm sure I could find 20 more things to nitpick about how this game is really weird and doesn't make any sense. But that's basically it's really weird and it doesn't make any sense. So,
as a fellow RPG, nerd, I'm glad that none of that's changed. So we're all in agreement. Mazes and Monsters. What the hell were people thinking when they tried to make that? Again, it's not for, this isn't for people who enjoyed the thing, which was all much to our chagrin. This is to rile up your grandparents and your aunts and uncles.
Yeah. I just have to say really quickly, my final thought is that this is not a good movie. I'm not saying that. I love things like this, though, that cause me to have to think about context, where you come across a terrible movie and you go, what in the world is going on here? Like, why does this exist? So to me, it's still time well spent to go after, much more than.
It's so funny, and I didn't mean to interrupt. It's so funny you say that, because Rain's reaction, she watched it with me. So I was like, hey, you want to watch the Satanic Panic movie from the 80s? Yeah. Tom Hanks. She's like, sure. And afterwards she goes, wow, I really could have been doing anything except watching that movie.
I went 2 hours.
It's funny that you go. It's funny that you're like, I don't mind spending the time with.
No.
Really,
but I mean, well, and that, but. I have this pretentious notion in my head. I don't think I've ever properly articulated it to myself, but I have this pretentious notion that I'm trying to understand the culture. And so I'm always trying to watch older things that are very difficult to understand unless I contextualize them for myself.
Well, it's funny that you've taken this, like, I am an observant alien from Nexus 7. Will you live through it?
Yes, that's true.
Like, the one guy, the blonde guy, is as Jason-y as possible, in my opinion. Short of he doesn't shop at Chess King. That's the difference. And you're like, I can contextualize this thing as if, like, I could see Sophia having that, like, wow, this is an aspect of the 80s I didn't think about. Cool. Thanks for showing me this, Dad. But Jason's like, I have this pretentious notion as if I didn't live through it. That's hilarious.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to take all of that as a compliment.
I mean, we're friends. I hope so.
Yes. So, okay, let's do endorsements. Whatever you want to expose the world to that you've been thinking of. Definitely some of those YouTube videos. Tony dug one up, so I'll put one in there. Julia, do you have anything to endorse this week?
Gosh, I don't remember anymore. I feel like I don't know. I know
we've all been in a journey through the cave.
Yeah, I know I've watched stuff since last week, but now I can't think of what it was. Yeah, I got nothing for right now. If I think of something before
That's fine. It's totally fine. No, yeah. Tony, is there anything that you'd like to share?
Let's see. I know this week I posted I'd done an interview for Deserts of Mars, which I'm still, it's been rough trying to keep a band together when you can't really get together for practice. And this band in particular hasn't been set up for live stream because of just various crazy stuff going on in everybody's lives, which has overturned. I think my guitarist has been affected the most, but I'll probably put that up if that's cool. Get some insight into the latest EP and a bunch of other, nerdy crap that I like, because in as much as I'm never going to be the cool musician. Like, I don't think I haven't built up mystique in the same way that some musicians are. So I am me to a fault. So there is an interview on that I'll post up that ended up being pretty cool. Oh yeah, and another thing on that, one thing that's really cool, if you're in Austin, I need to find the link. Because I was making some changes to it, but we became part of the Electric Ladybird streaming service through Austin Public Library. They have a music streaming service where they support local bands.
Cool.
So I spent a lot of time in the library when I was younger, so that's really cool. As far as media goes, I've been watching stuff off and on, but I'm kind of with Julia. Like, I've been watching a lot of really just innocuous stuff, random things. On Tubi and on Netflix and such, but I can't really recall any. If I think of anything, I'll post it. But I just recommend kind of doing what I'm doing. Like, if you need to self-medicate with fun movie stuff, start digging through your Roku and find some weird outlier stuff. That's what's been really getting me.
Oh yeah.
And if you have HBO Max. I did notice, I'm lucky that, I technically work for Warner Brothers. So at the very top, now I can't remember the name of it because I'm terrible. But there was a Japanese movie I posted, like The X from Outer Space. That was streaming on HBO Max, subtitled. So I'm all about that. Anything weird and random.
I remember they
have a lot of cool
in a lot of like Starlog magazine and stuff like that.
Yeah. They also, what's cool about HBO Max, as far as when I've been digging through it, I already have the Criterion channel, but a bunch of Criterion stuff showed up on that. So and also all the Studio Ghibli stuff. So that's really, really cool. But yeah, The X from Outer Space, even though I haven't watched all of it yet, I watched enough to know it's my jam. So
love it.
There you go.
1967 that was. We definitely need to see that because it kept showing up in magazines when I was a kid. Sophia, do you have anything to endorse this week?
Well, because this movie's sort of about D&D, like loosely. I guess I watched this. There's a channel called Watcher that during quarantine they've been doing a series. I think they call it the Quarantine Games. They've been doing social distancing D&D. So they've been playing a D&D game, like, you know, where they're like, there's 4 of them, they're each in their own house and they're like Zoom calling or something like that, and they're playing a D&D game. So if you want to watch what D&D is actually like, you can go check out Watcher, and they're doing that, and that's fun, and I like that
Is
channel.
Watcher a channel on Twitch or YouTube, or where is it?
It's on YouTube. It's a YouTube channel. It features sort of like at least 3 people who used to work for BuzzFeed. Stephen Lim, Ryan Bergara, Shane Madej. Ryan and Shane used to be, well, they're still on BuzzFeed Unsolved. They used to work for BuzzFeed. Now they have their own thing, Watcher Network. So their channel, they do whatever. They do a lot of stuff. They do puppet history, which I really enjoy. They do social distancing D&D. They have a series like talking in haunted houses or something. They like take guests through haunted houses and interview them and stuff. And so I like that channel. And they're playing D&D. So if you want to check that out, that's fun.
Yeah,
That's
Sophia
super
showed me
cool.
that puppet history the other day, and it is hilarious.
It's really
It's
good.
so funny.
Very
That
cool.
great endorsement.
Yeah, fantastic. So I guess okay. I think I need to do log rolling. I have to account for the fact that Castle of Horror Anthology Volume 3 comes out this week. So we've got 14 different stories from best-selling authors, some really great guys like David Bowles and Leanna Renee Heber and Sam Knight and Bonnie Jo Stufflebeam, and really neat stories all around summer. I have a story in there, and Incher Yo, who's co-publisher with Castlebridge Media. So Castle of Horror Anthology Volume 3, Summer 11, came out this week, and I'm super excited. And we've actually, probably by the time you're listening to this, if there's time, if it's still Monday, we're going to have a Zoom launch party on Monday night. So if you are listening to this beforehand, join us Monday evening. You can
How do
find
they join you?
The easiest way is to go to the Facebook page, and the Zoom link is on the Facebook. It's on the Castle of Horror podcast Facebook page. There is a Zoom link, and the actual event is 7:30 Mountain Time, which is to say 8:30 Central, 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific. So come one, come all, ask us questions. I think it'll be super fun. Yeah. So that brings us to the end of our discussion of Mazes and Monsters. This was a totally, totally fun conversation. Thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate you being on. Sophia, I appreciate you joining us. Drew, if you're listening, I hope you get well. Drew is feeling a little under the weather, and we can't wait to talk to you next week. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sophia.
Yeah, we miss you, Drew, and thanks again, Sophia, for coming on and providing your insight. It's really, really cool.
Yeah, no problem. I was like pulled into the room to like see one scene of the movie yesterday, and my parents are like, "Do you want to do the show with us tomorrow?" I'm like, "You know what? Sure, let's do it."
Awesome.
Awesome.
So,
Awesome.
Thanks so much.
All right.
Thank
All
you.
right. Have a great week. Happy Father's Day, everybody.